After the British returned ownership of the city-state to China, Hong Kong enjoyed a couple decades of relatively autonomous rule. It was still technically considered to be a part of China, but it was given its own system of governance. A large part of this independence came from the creation of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, which is exactly what it sounds like. A group of representatives chosen to enact the policies impacting the Hong Kong population. This is the origin of the famous term, one country, two systems. Hong Kong would be a part of China, but it would be given its own system of governance. I mention this bit of history because the recent national security law completely violates this idea of one country, two systems. As an extremely brief summary, the new national security law designates a whole slew of new events as being acts of subversion. If anyone within Hong Kong's borders is suspected of being a dissenter, he'll be quietly whisked away to Beijing for a private trial held behind closed doors, where he most definitely will not be tried by a jury of his peers. If he's found guilty of whatever kangaroo charges the court throws at him, he could face a maximum sentence of life in prison. And you want to know the kicker of this whole ordeal? The national security law was written in a way that gives Beijing, not Hong Kong, the power of interpretation. Meaning if the alleged dissenter is lucky enough to have his trial held in Hong Kong, Beijing can still step in at any time and overrule that trial's ruling with a ruling of their own. Beijing gave themselves the authorization to create whatever laws they want, the power to interpret those laws however they want, and then the authority to use their own government agents to enforce those laws however they want. In other words, everyone in Hong Kong, regardless of their citizenship, must now play completely subservient towards the Communist Party, or they risk life in prison. And on top of this, the national security law was passed in the dead of night, in complete secret, without the knowledge of Hong Kong's Legislative Council. So, in one fell swoop, Beijing turned the compromise of one country, two systems into essentially one country and one system. No more will Hong Kong be able to decide how to run its government. For all intents and purposes, all of the economic and administrative decisions will now be made in Beijing. Let's stay on the topic of Hong Kong's economy for a little bit because there's actually some far-reaching implications there. China has benefited immensely from its proximity to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Many of China's largest corporations, which have blown up in the last couple of decades, are listed in Hong Kong. Companies like the Alibaba Group, Huawei, and the Tencent Group. Symbiotically, a major cause for Hong Kong's recent prosperity is due to its close proximity to mainland China. The Chinese companies benefits by opening up investment opportunities to investors from around the world. A portion of that investment stays in Hong Kong as a fee for being the middleman between those Chinese companies and the foreign investors. However, the attitude towards Chinese companies has taken a dip lately. Frequent scandals involving varying degrees of fraud are causing investors to eye Chinese companies in a more critical light. Luckin Coffee is an example that comes to mind. In April, it was revealed that more than $300 million of its sales were completely fabricated, causing its share price to drop by more than 75%. Investors don't like this kind of volatility. We prefer to keep our monies in a safe, predictable investment that aren't involved in a culture which allows a company to lose 3/4 of its valuation at the snap of a finger. The national security law will add a whole new level of political and economic instability to the region. This, on top of the recent distrust towards Chinese companies, means that it's extremely likely that Hong Kong will experience a sharp drop in prosperity as investors choose to park their money in other safer vehicles. But more importantly, it isn't just the money that's leaving Hong Kong. Hong Kong's own residents have been immigrating out of the region en masse. Nobody knows for sure how many Hong Kongers are leaving the city-state because that information isn't tracked. But we do know, for lack of a better way to put it, that it's a lot. The immigration consulting firm Anlex has seen a 20x increase in inquiries. So, where are all of these Hong Kongers relocating to? Well, there are several places. The UK recently made headlines when it announced that it would be offering sanctuary to Hong Kongers fleeing the city-state as a result of the national security law. Those who don't want to return to their old British roots have other options, though. Canada is home to more Hong Kongers than any Western nation in the world. Those who don't want to move across the world, however, can choose to settle in Taiwan. Just 400 miles away from the city-state, Taiwan is considered to be one of the most popular choices for emigrating Hong Kongers. Not all Hong Kongers are considering immigration, however. It's entirely possible that the implications of the national security law are being completely blown out of proportion. So there's a group of individuals who are waiting to see how bad the situation gets before leaving their home. The risks of emigrating to a new country during the COVID pandemic are great, especially since there's also the possibility that China might not even allow them to return to Hong Kong if they leave. And then there's the final group of individuals who are choosing to stay in Hong Kong to fight the fight against Beijing's oppression. After all, leaving the city-state now while Beijing is flexing its authoritative muscles might seem a bit like giving up. And if enough people stay behind to fight the good fight, then there's a possibility that future generations might enjoy a better, more democratic life in Hong Kong.